Alright, throughout this video we're going to be going over all the major updates when it comes to the Dixie Fire, the Fly Fire, and the Tamarack Fire, and just a few things that I notice on the satellite imagery right now. One, just how much smoke is coming off of the Dixie Fire and the Fly Fires right now. Those remained active overnight, and a lot of that smoke is settling down into the northern Sacramento Valley and finding its way into Oregon as well, leading to some poor air quality. So we will take a look at the air quality forecast later in this video. But when it actually comes to the fires, the Dixie Fire and the Fly Fire did have a large amount of growth yesterday. Dixie is officially up to 181,000 acres, Fly Fire about 4,000. And then when we move over here, you see not as much smoke coming off the Tamarack Fire right now as we were seeing in previous days. And I would say there is some good news coming out of the Tamarack Fire, although that one is up to 65,000 acres. Again, with all of these fires, there are a large number of evacuation warnings and orders in place, so always stay updated with your local resources. Now, the last thing I notice on the satellite imagery is this moisture that you see moving out of Arizona and starting to find its way into Southern California. Now, this might look very familiar to the setup we had about a week ago, and that's because it almost is the exact same setup. We have a high pressure system that's going to be funneling this moisture into California throughout the weekend. And then just like about a week ago, there will be the chance for some thunderstorms, especially over the Tamarack Fire. But then with both of our fires, we'll have increased instability, which, like we saw last time, led to some erratic gusty winds and some increased fire spread. So I think that will be the big story throughout the weekend, to see how that monsoonal moisture interacts with our fires. So we will be taking a look at that possibility throughout this video. First, I just want to dive into the Dixie Fire though, because you can see that this one was active overnight. We're actually doing a forecast for the Dixie Fire and the Fly Fire. I can almost combine those at this point because they look like they're close enough to each other that I would imagine in the next day or two they will officially combine, but as of right now, not combined yet. But you can see how active both the Dixie and Fly Fires remained overnight, just based on how much smoke they were kicking up even earlier this morning. And then especially for the Dixie Fire, you can see a large smoke plume popping up right at the end of this video, which is, I would say, a bit alarming because it's only about 10:30 right now when I'm recording this live stream, and it's only going to be getting hotter and drier throughout the day today. So I imagine it's going to be, I hate to say the bad news, but I imagine it's going to be another very active day on both the Dixie and the Fly Fires, just based on the fact that we're already seeing a large amount of smoke coming off of it, and conditions are going to be getting warmer and drier. So if we actually want to look at the air quality right now, this is just one site that I showed. Not all of the cameras throughout this whole area look this bad, but this is just an example of what it looks like underneath that smoke plume that we were seeing really starting to kick up in the last couple of hours. This is the Jarbo Gap camera, and you can just see how hazy the air is underneath this Dixie Fire smoke plume, and with some influence from the Fly Fire as well. So because that, again, at the end of the video, we will be taking a look at air quality, because you can see air quality has started to impact other areas, not just spots underneath the plume, seeing that smoke settle in the northern Sacramento Valley as well. But just given that video, we couldn't really get an idea of fire activity that's been happening on the Dixie Fire. So this is the video I posted on my Twitter yesterday of the Dixie Fire. And a couple things I want to point out. One, you can see how fast some of that smoke is traveling closer to the surface. That's being pushed by the winds, which have been playing a big role with this fire throughout its lifetime. But then another big factor we've had is the instability. And again, this is what ties into that possible thunderstorm threat coming in later this weekend. And the key indicator I always look for instability is where you see the smoke plume jump up like that. So as that moisture comes in, it basically just makes that more likely. And the reason that's a big deal is because with all that rising air, you get a lot of air rushing in, and that's where the fire can start to create its own weather. That's actually the top thing that we study at the San Jose State Fire Weather Research Laboratory, and our team actually is going up to the Dixie Fire later this afternoon to try to collect some data on this fire to hopefully help understand these fires, and if in any way it can help with the fire suppression resources, that would be a bonus as well. So when it actually comes to the Dixie Fire, let's zoom in and check out the fire perimeter and the hotspots. Again, all those little red dots, that shows where the satellite imagery is actively picking up hotspots, and then where the shaded color is, that is just where the previous fire perimeter is. Now, it would be helpful to actually turn off the perimeter for a second here, just so you can see where the majority of those hotspots are. It's almost like the fire has split into two separate zones. We have the western zone up here and the eastern zone down here. So I think we'll start with the good news. The good news looks to be on the southern edge. Again, that was the key priority at the beginning of this fire because they wanted to keep it away from some of our more populated areas like Concal, Paradise, Magalia. And right there, you can just see almost no hotspots whatsoever, basically just patrolling and doing mop-up on that southern finger right there. There's also some good news near Bucks Lake. They've done a successful firing operation. They have some good lines in down here, and they're expecting to see increased containment yet, but increased control down in this Bucks Lake area. From the latest report I had listened to, it sounded like they're feeling fairly confident down on the southeastern edge of this fire. Then as we travel up here, this has been a spot of the fire that's been causing a lot of trouble for the last few days. We've just consistently, it seems like every single day, you see those little spot fires popping out ahead of where the major blaze is. Again, that's where the major blaze is right here. The winds can pick up burning embers, toss them outside of the control lines, and that's always a problem because what was originally your plan for containment, then you have to go back and try to contain some of these spot fires that have started. But as of right now, none of those new spot fires on this western side, they said, have grown to any significance. It's not like that spot fire we see on the northeastern side, which has grown to more than 4,000 acres. These ones, they have been able to handle them when they jump over, but you can see a large amount of growth to that whole northwestern edge. So I believe there are some new evacuation orders due to that increased growth on the northwestern edge. Now, as we get to the northern edge, this is where some very interesting fire suppression tactics come in. Right here, I didn't actually report on this yesterday because at first glance, it looks like it's a firing operation, but I hadn't seen any updates or confirmation of that yet, so I actually purposely ignored it in yesterday's update because I didn't want to put forward anything that wasn't actually true, but I can now confirm that that is a firing operation. So basically what that means is when the conditions were more favorable, they actually purposely lit this line of fire to clear out a lot of the fuel so that by the time this northern edge gets there, there's not much else to burn and then the fire slows down. And just an idea of why they do that kind of strategy, I'm going to turn on the fire history for the fires around this area, and you can see how previous fires reduce the spread of a current fire. If we look down here, the North Complex, that was one of the fires I was reporting on last year, burned in 2020, one of our biggest fires of 2020. You can see how its fire perimeter, that red line right there, goes directly or almost connects with the Dixie Fire, but it almost connects like a puzzle piece. Right when the Dixie Fire gets to where the North Complex burns, it seems to have stopped. Now, this could be for two separate reasons. One, because a lot of the fuels have been removed from this area due to the North Complex last year, but two, sometimes they're actually able to reuse some of the containment lines that they used on a previous fire. So, again, I just thought that was interesting. One, how current fires interact with past fires and how past fires are actually beneficial, and also how that ties into the fire strategies we're seeing right now in that purposeful firing operation used to protect a lot of the structures near Lake Almanor. So I'll zoom back out here because we also want to look at this northeastern edge right there. That's one of the parts of the fire for the Dixie Fire we've seen the most growth over the last few days. Again, that northern side where you see all those hot spots, that's been an area of a lot of growth, but also that spot fire that started there. And again, that's also why instability is important. I was showing that with that moisture coming in, we're likely to see higher plumes, which means you have more winds rushing in, and then more winds can also lead to more spot fires. I do know one CAL FIRE representative said that in his 20 years of working for CAL FIRE, he's never seen spotting at such large distances like we're seeing with this fire. He said it's 3 to 4 miles where a burning ember can be picked up by the winds, dropped, and then due to the critically dry fuels, there's about an 80 to 90% ignition rate with a lot of those spot fires. And that northeastern edge right there, that was one of those spot fires. It was small at first, but you can see that it has now grown to a fairly significant size, and we are seeing a lot of heat on that northeastern edge of that one. Now this far one, that is the Fly Fire. I don't believe this is a confirmed spot fire yet. I think it's still under investigation, but just given the nature of this fire, the spotting distances we have been seeing, I would imagine they're going to find out that this was due to a spot fire, but again, that's not confirmed yet. And that one has grown to about 4,000 acres there. And again, that one I think is one of, or it's not I think, this is what the CAL FIRE representatives were saying, that is one of the top priorities for this fire right now because of its close proximity to a large number of structures. If I turn on these structures here, you can actually see those orange dots that pop up. That's where the structures are around this fire. And you can see that the Fly Fire is just to the north of Quincy. So I do know, I believe the entire town of Quincy has an evacuation order at this point. And I do know that's going to be one of the key spots that I'm watching for the Dixie Fire throughout the course of this day. Now, when it comes to the simulation for what this fire is going to do throughout the day, we can look at the WRF fire model. This is put out by our Fire Weather Research Laboratory at San Jose State. First thing I'd mention this before I show this every time, it's an experimental forecast only, and it doesn't take into account the previous containment lines or firing operations that have been done. It's just showing how the current fire would interact with the weather to increase spread. And the main reason I show this is, one, it gives you some great perspective for how lucky we are that we have firefighters, because a lot of times the spread that you see in the simulation is much more than we actually get because it doesn't take into account the fact that we have 4,000 people fighting this thing. But I think the main reason I showed it is it's a perfect illustration of how fire and weather interact. Again, that's my background. Right now I'm getting my master's in meteorology at San Jose State, and the key thing that I study there is fire weather. And it's this interaction of weather and fire that you can see actually playing out with this fire in real time, and this is basically just an illustration of it. So we'll go back to yesterday afternoon. You can see during the afternoon hours we get those up canyon winds, a lot of winds blowing from the south and southwest, and that leads to increased growth on that northern edge and especially that northeastern finger. Then I'll pause it right here, or I'll go back 1 second, where it shifts from the afternoon to the overnight hours. During the overnight hours, you notice these winds shift around and they start blowing down the canyon. Then when that happens, if we didn't have firefighters, we would see increased fire spread to that southern edge of the fire. Luckily, we do have a lot of great containment on that southern edge, so actually not expecting to see that kind of behavior on the southern edge. Just interesting to see how the winds and the fire interact. And then throughout the afternoon, this is now leading into the forecast for today. You can see in the next hour or two, those down canyon winds will start to shift back around to up canyon, and you can see the simulation is expecting a large amount of growth, especially on that northeastern edge. Now, again, that probably looks pretty alarming to you, but I will remind you, we do have over 4,000 people fighting this, so we're likely to not see fire growth that extreme, but I do expect to see increased growth on that northeastern edge. So when it comes to the Dixie Fire, first I'll just say the Fly Fire because I couldn't actually find a page for it, so we're not going to look at all the individual stats on it, but Fly Fire last I saw was up to 3,800 acres. When it comes to the Dixie Fire, you can see we did jump up a large amount from yesterday. It's up to 181,000 acres, 19% contained. Like I said, there's a number of evacuation warnings in place. You can find those by clicking the links in the description of this video. And when it comes to the numbers, you can see 10 structures have been damaged. This number did jump up yesterday. We're now up to 16 structures destroyed. But the good news is we have a lot of resources on this fire right now. 31 helicopters, 365 engines, 100 dozers, 60 water tenders, 4,266 personnel, and 76 crews. And one interesting thing about these resources is what I heard on this northern edge. Just based on that satellite imagery, you could see how much smoke was coming off of this fire. So you imagine they can't use all that much aircraft, especially on that northern edge where a lot of that smoke is blowing. So what they're actually doing is bringing in some of the water tenders to start spraying that retardant, especially to reinforce that firing line on that northern edge there. Hopefully some of that wind that we're getting in the afternoon today will help to clear out some of the smoke so that we can get some more aircraft on this fire. Now, when it comes to the weather, I think that's the next thing that we should really dive into, because that's going to play a fairly big role throughout this weekend. This is going to look very similar to the forecast I did about a week ago on the Dixie Fire, because it's almost the exact same setup. Remember, last week and right now, there is a high pressure system almost directly over Wyoming, which is exactly what we're going to start to see developing over this weekend. And what that means is you have clockwise circulation around that high pressure system. So on the southern edge of it, it's able to take that large amount of monsoonal moisture that's over Arizona and funnel it directly into California. Now we're actually getting a little double whammy with this one, because it also looks like there's a low pressure system off of the west of Mexico, and those spin the opposite direction. Those spin counterclockwise, but those winds will have the exact same effect on that right side of taking some of that monsoonal moisture and some Pacific moisture probably as well, and pushing that into California. So we have these two different systems here, both working together to funnel that monsoonal moisture in. And if you actually want to see that, I'll actually continue to close my tabs as we go along here. You can tell how much better my computer is doing today, though, as I do this earlier in the day before it's 85 degrees where I'm filming this. So again, those two systems funneling that moisture in. In this image, you can see the conditions that we've had throughout the last couple of days, and we'll be continuing mostly into this afternoon, where we have extremely dry air over the Dixie Fire. And then watch that monsoonal moisture from Arizona over this weekend and going even into Monday and Tuesday as well. It almost perfectly comes in. It almost looks like a wave of moisture just moving in. And again, the reason this is so important is we saw the impacts that this had on the Dixie Fire when it came through last Sunday and Monday. It led to a lot of instability. We had huge smoke columns, which means you have a lot of air rushing in, the fire creating a lot of its own winds and weather, and we did see a lot of growth on that northeastern edge the last time this happened. Right now, it looks like the overall thunderstorm threat is less for the Dixie Fire than we were seeing with the last system, but again, the instability will most likely be moving through, and that upper level moisture, so we will have to keep our eye on that throughout the weekend, as I think that is the big story of what could have some big impacts on the Dixie Fire and the Fly Fire getting into Sunday afternoon especially. Now, unfortunately, a lot of that moisture, you might think, oh, it's good news, moisture's coming in, that's going to help put the fire out, but not a lot of that moisture, if any at all, is actually at the surface. It's just high enough in the atmosphere to create the instability, but you notice just based on looking at that relative humidity chart, none of that, or I shouldn't say none, but very little of that moisture actually finds its way to the surface, and you can see how dry we are remaining over the next 48 hours. I think overall, looking at the fire weather forecast, there's really two different things going on here. This afternoon, we're still mostly in that pattern we had yesterday, where the temperatures have continued to increase because of that high pressure that's strengthening. So you can see temperatures up into the mid 90s today. That will create some challenging factors for our firefighters. You can see winds once again mostly from the southwest. That basically perfectly was illustrated by the simulation of Wildfires, why it's expecting more of that growth to the northeast due to those southwest winds. And then when it comes to the humidity, you can see extremely dry today, just getting in some places into the upper single digits to low teens. So very challenging conditions throughout the day today. So I am unfortunately expecting more growth, especially on that northeastern edge of the fire. Now tomorrow, things start to change a little bit. It looks like we're trending downward when it comes to temperatures, which is good news, but we are still in the low to mid 90s right there. We do still have those southerly winds in the afternoon, some gusts in the afternoons getting up to around 20 miles per hour, and we do still have extremely dry air at the surface. Now the big story for tomorrow afternoon is what's going to happen as that moisture flows in and the interaction that will have on our fires. Most likely it will lead to some more instability and gusty erratic winds. Now the last thing I'll say on the fire weather is what might actually be the biggest factor with this fire is the fact that this moisture doesn't increase during the overnight hours. Normally you see relative humidity jump up to 60-70% at night, but for this fire, and especially the last couple of days, it's been remaining extremely dry throughout the overnight hours. If you're dry 24 hours a day, that means you can have active fire behavior 24 hours a day, and that is something that we have been seeing with both the Dixie and the Fly fires. Now, with that being said, you can see on that bottom column there, we had no thunder probability, at least according to that, for Saturday or Sunday evenings. But Monday, it looks like the thunderstorm possibility does shift farther into Northern California than on Friday and Saturday, or Saturday and Sunday. You think that moisture is coming up from the south, so it will take some time for it to reach all the way up to the Butte County area. But it looks like Monday they have an increased thunderstorm possibility. So again, this is the big story when it comes to the weather that we're going to have to continue to follow for the Dixie Fire. Now, when it comes to evacuation warnings, again, there are a large number of warnings in place right now. I believe the entire town of Quincy is under an evacuation warning, especially as we've seen that fly fire increase in growth. And I put the links for this in the description. Again, never look at this and think that that's the current warning. Not sure when you might be watching this video, so put the links in the description for you to click on. And it actually looks like there's a separate map for Tahoma County, so I don't have the link in the description for that one yet, but I can certainly look for it and try to add that one as well. So when it just comes to the summary of the Dixie Fire, you can see large amount of smoke coming off of it right now. We had some active behavior last night. Unfortunately, it's going to be in the mid 90s today with relative humidity in the single digits to low teens with some southwest winds picking up in the afternoon. So unfortunately, we are expecting more fire growth throughout the day today, but the good news is we have over 4,000 resources on this fire, so lots of efforts and hard work being done to contain this fire and protect a lot of our structures in the area. Now we'll shift down to the Tamarack Fire, which overall, I would say there is some good news with this one. Good news could start out just looking at the satellite imagery, certainly not seeing as much smoke coming off of this right now than when we were looking at this camera yesterday. And part of the reason for that is some of the successful operations that we had on this fire throughout the day yesterday. So earlier on in this fire, we had very gusty winds mixed with the critically dry fuels and the low relative humidity and the warm temperatures. There was really, and a lot of steep terrain. It was really almost every factor you could think of for wildfire, even thunderstorms as well, all working together to spread that fire to the northeast. And a lot of those factors are still in play. We still have a lot of that steep terrain, critically dry fuels, low relative humidity. But the good news is, for yesterday and throughout the day today, the winds look to be slightly weaker. And those slightly weaker winds yesterday really helped them get some much better control on this fire. Again, the key part of the Tamarack Fire that we've been covering over the last couple of days is that northeastern finger that you can see has stretched all the way into Nevada. Remember that one spot fire that jumped Highway 395, grew to its own fire of about 2,500 acres, and you can see it looks like it's combined with the overall Tamarack Fire at this point. But then again, the reason that northeastern finger was the key priority is because of all of those hot spots that you're seeing there, a lot of activity on this fire, and because of its close proximity to a large number of structures. I can actually show that if we zoom in here. If we zoom in and then I'll click on and off the structures so you can see exactly where those are. I'll zoom out once. You can see that we do have a large amount of structures fairly close to where this fire is burning the most actively. So there are a large amount of evacuation warnings and orders in place. But the good news is, and the good news does come in, that yesterday's operations, they sounded very confident, and it sounded like they had some great success in protecting a lot of those structures, getting some good containment, especially on this northern edge right here, that where they do have containment seems to stretch along that line right there, going up closer to Woodford's. And although the most active part of this fire is closest to a lot of those structures, they've been able to bring as much resources as necessary into there to really get some good lines in, especially on the spot fire that we're seeing up here and on this northern edge. They were using a lot of aircraft yesterday in conjunction with hand crews to really get control over this one, and overall it sounded like they're starting to feel a lot more confident because of those more favorable wind conditions that allowed them to get some more control on this one. Now, again, with that being said, the most active part of that fire is close to those structures, so a number of evacuation warnings are in place, and you can find the link in the description for all those current evacuations. Now, I also want to go over to this northern edge here where you do see some of those hot spots where we do have some of those structures as well. We can look at where those structures are on this map. And the good news for the large amount of structures you see right there is that's the part of the fire where we do have our containment. So good news there. And it sounds like they're fairly confident with the lines that they have in place in that area as well. And then when it comes to Markleyville and Grover Hot Springs, I actually usually like to turn the fire perimeter off when I talk about those because it makes it look like they completely burned over, but those are looking great right now. They're basically just patrolling and mopping up those areas. You can just see based on the hotspots, we haven't seen any hotspots in the middle of this fire over the last few days. Most of those hotspots on that northeastern edge, especially that northeastern edge, the northern edge, and then in that southern edge as well. Places like Markleyville looking great right now. Now, I will turn it back on to talk about that southern edge because they actually don't have any resources on the southern edge right now. They've deployed them to the highest priority areas where we have the largest amount of structures and where the fire is growing the most actively. On the southern edge, it's had very minimal fire spread. One, the predominant wind direction has been from the southwest, so the fire is just moving against the wind. The wind is actually acting to blow the fire back up against itself. So very slow growth on that southern edge. And it looks like there's another reason that southern edge has been burning as slowly as it has. If we look at the fire history, you can see where the Washington fire burned in 2015. And this is just a perfect illustration of how much it helps to actually have previous fires because it clears out a lot of those dead, dry fuels. And you can see how even without any resources on the southern edge, right when it gets to where the Washington fire burned in 2015, it just appears to stop. And that looks like that'll continue to happen as it continues to spread down right there. Although, again, this fire is burning very slowly, so we'll even see if it does get that far. It's, again, moving against the wind, and we've seen very slow growth in that whole area over the last few days. So just thought I'd show that though because it is a good illustration of how previous fires actually do help current fires, to help current firefighters, I should say. So again, overall the key spot that I'm watching for this fire is that northeastern edge though, because that is the part of the fire where we are seeing the most active hotspots and it's the closest to the largest amount of structures. Now when it comes to the Tamarack Fire, we are at 65,000 acres, so this did jump up from yesterday, but 4% containment. We actually did increase the amount of actual line where we have containment, but because of the overall fire grew as well, the percentage stayed the same. So just a little statistics lesson there on you can gain containment without actually gaining containment percentage. When it comes to the incident overview, I'll just remind you of this fire. It actually started July 4th due to lightning, and there was a large number of other fires that were started at the same time. So this fire was basically put on patrol and just monitoring while they put out some of those other fires. And then on July 16th, it went from 40 acres to about 7,000 acres in one day. And we've just continued to see it grow ever since then, mostly to that northeastern edge. Now, when it comes to the resources on this fire, we have 1,400 personnel on it. Again, most of those on that northeastern section where it is the highest priority with the largest amount of structures. Again, 65,000 acres, 4% containment. And they have seen some extreme fire behavior with this one. Looked slightly better yesterday as the winds weren't as strong, but certainly still a lot of fire still active with this one. And a big reason for that, possibly the biggest reason, is the critically dry fuels in this area. We're seeing some record dry fuels, and then that's also being mixed with some of those winds picking up in the afternoons, which can lead to some spot fires like we saw for the one that jumped 395. But again, the good news on that is we're seeing reduced winds both yesterday afternoon and this afternoon. Now, what's the big story in the weather forecast is what's going to be happening throughout the weekend. Now, I already went over this for the Dixie Fire, but I put the chapters for the different stories we talk about in the timestamps and in the comment and description below. So I do know some people just click directly to the fire that they're interested in. So I am going to go over the same kind of overall weather pattern that we were looking at for the Dixie Fire. So just like we saw about a week ago, there's a high pressure system developing right over Wyoming and Utah. And due to the circulation around that, it spins clockwise. That's moving down, and on the southern edge, it takes monsoonal moisture over Arizona and pushes it straight into California. Remember, the last time that this happened, we saw the impacts that it had on the Tamarack Fire. We were actually unsure of how those thunderstorms were going to interact. On one hand, it could increase your relative humidity, bring some rain, and we actually did get a little bit of rain on the Tamarack Fire. But the flip side of the coin was it can lead to new lightning starts, and it can also lead to gusty, erratic winds. The last time the thunderstorms came through, the overall impact from that thunderstorm activity was the gusty winds, and that was actually what initially started to really make this northeastern finger start to take off, was when those thunderstorms came through. So again, that same kind of setup is happening again, where we have the high pressure system spinning clockwise, funneling that Arizona moisture, monsoonal moisture, into California. In this case, though, we actually also have a low pressure system off of Mexico, which is doing the exact opposite thing in terms of circulation. It spins counterclockwise, but it's doing the same thing in terms of bringing that monsoonal moisture from Arizona into California. You think on the right side here, those winds are traveling up, so it's able to take some of that moisture, maybe a little Pacific moisture as well, and push it directly into California. If we actually want to see how this works, right now we have still a lot of dry air, especially over Northern California though. And throughout the weekend, you're going to see that moisture get funneled in to parts of California. So this is increasing the chances of thunderstorms throughout the next few days, and especially for the Tamarack Fire area, where we're higher up in the mountains and thunderstorms are more likely. So you can actually see that on this map right there. Looks like they have it officially, the increased threat officially starting 5 a.m. on Sunday morning. There's about a 10 to 20% chance of thunder. They have that continuing until about 10 p.m. on Sunday. 10 p.m. on Sunday, and then we do still see some of that moisture hanging out on Monday and Tuesday, so I imagine that thunderstorm threat will continue into Monday afternoon as well. Now, when it comes to the other fire weather factors, first thing I noticed for this afternoon, still very dry in the low, or very warm, still in the low 90s, and very dry with relative humidity in the mid-teens. I know some spots are getting into the low teens and even single digits in some places. Now right there, it does show those afternoon wind gusts pick up to about 20 miles per hour, and we do see that in some of the areas more prone to high winds, but overall, both yesterday and today, we're expecting less winds than in previous days, so that is some good news for the forecast there. Looks like tomorrow, as that moisture starts to funnel in, the relative humidity should pick up a little bit, and the temperatures drop maybe a couple of degrees, But again, the big thing I will be watching is that thunderstorm possibility, because the last time it came through, again, it led to those gusty erratic winds and a lot of growth on that northeastern side. So that's what it looks like. For the next 2 days, we have that thunderstorm potential directly over the Tamarack Fire. So again, going to be very important to see how those thunderstorms and the instability interact with this fire. And again, once again, it's the same two sides of the coin. We might get some rain, but we also might get some gusty erratic winds or possibly even some new lightning starts. So going to have to watch it closely. Now, I did find this map. I haven't shown this in past videos, but I put the link in the description. Pretty cool map that shows the fire perimeter, where all the different divisions and branches are separated, and then also the current evacuations as well. The current evacuations is that red color that you can see turning off and on right there. Again, don't take this word for it because I'm not sure when you'll be watching this video. The link to this is in the description, and you can find the most recent update of this evacuation map for the Tamarack Fire. Again, large number of evacuations in that northeastern section where the most active fire is and the largest amount of structures. So overall with the Tamarack Fire, I would say it has grown over the last couple days, but we've seen decreased growth, especially yesterday, as the winds gave firefighters a great opportunity to gain some containment. They're using a lot of aircraft as well. But the big question mark will be that thunderstorm threat as that moisture starts to funnel in from Arizona over this weekend. We'll just have to wait and see how that thunderstorm activity interacts with this fire once again. Now, when it comes to all these fires, one thing that you probably notice here is how much smoke is being kicked up, especially by the Dixie Fire and the Fly Fire here, and that is having an impact on air quality right now. This is just one of the live cameras from underneath the Dixie Fire smoke plume. Again, not all of the cameras look this bad, but you can just see how much smoke has settled down. Luckily, as the winds pick up in the afternoon, we should hopefully see some of this smoke clear out, but certainly air quality is a concern right now. If we actually want to see how that smoke might clear out throughout the day, you can see earlier in the morning, all that smoke settling even as far north as the Sacramento Valley. But as the southwest winds pick up in the afternoon, you see how it blows some of that surface smoke out of there. Now, with that being said, tomorrow morning, the winds will be calm again, so once again, we'll see a lot of that smoke settle down like we've seen the last couple of days. So if we actually want to look at the current air quality, you can see unhealthy air throughout much of California. No surprise there, just based on that satellite imagery showing how much smoke is over Northern California right now. And that is leading to some unhealthy air quality throughout much of Northern California and the Sierras as well. And when we look at the forecast for tomorrow, it looks like they're expecting more very unhealthy air over the Tamarack Fire and the Dixie Fire. I would say, in my personal opinion, again, most likely trust the models above my own personal opinion. There's some very high-level science that goes into a forecast model like this, but I would think you could almost switch those two air quality bubbles right there. I think Dixie Fire is going to be much more active today than the Tamarack Fire, so it's going to be creating a lot more smoke, and then we're going to once again see that settle down in the valleys like we're seeing as of right now. So again, pretty unhealthy air quality as of right now. Hopefully we'll see some of that clear out as winds pick up this afternoon, but we'll have to keep an eye on it because we do have some challenging fire weather conditions this afternoon, which will most likely lead to more smoke being produced. So again, when it comes to our fires, Dixie Fire is up to 181,000 acres. We've seen a lot of growth on that northern edge and that northeastern finger as well. You can see where the Fly Fire is. That one has grown to 4,000 acres and has led to some new evacuation orders in places like Quincy. I hate to bring the bad news, but it is going to be very warm, very dry throughout the day today. We have those southwest winds picking up in the afternoon. So expecting some more growth on the northern and northeastern edges when it comes to the Dixie Fire. Now, one good thing, I just want to mention this again because you might be confused by what that line is there. That is actually a firing operation that was purposely done when the conditions were more favorable. to clear out some of those fuels to protect the structures around Lake Almanor. So again, that right there, not a spot fire that has started. That right there was a successful firing operation to protect the structures, clear out some fuel, and hopefully act as a barrier and a line to stop that fire from spreading any farther north. Now, when it comes to the Tamarack Fire, again, lots of hot spots on that northeastern section there. That is an area that's closest to the largest amount of structures. It has jumped Highway 395, but we had some favorable winds yesterday. It sounds like we're going to have some favorable winds again today. They are getting some great containment and some great control over this fire in a lot of the key spots. Very successful aerial operations as well. So looking much better right now than we were looking in previous days. Although, again, the big question mark when it comes to the Tamarack Fire is that thunderstorm threat developing throughout this weekend as that monsoonal moisture is funneled in from Arizona. And then we'll just take another look at the bootleg fire. I didn't mention this today. I had mentioned yesterday that was likely going to be my last update on the bootleg fire. And you do see we did have some hot spots on that northern edge there, but overall only grew about, I think, 700 acres yesterday. This one has certainly slowed down. I am continuing to monitor it, and if there are any big changes, I'll be sure to include it in the update and forecast again. But as of right now, that one is remaining around 400,000 acres. Now, when it comes to some of our other fires that have been happening throughout this season, let's just zoom out here. The Tenant Fire, I believe that's what that one is right up there. And I believe the current incidents, let's see if it pops up. And the current incident bubbles are not popping up, so we can't see exactly how many acres those are. Basically, the point I was about to make is when it comes to the other fires in California, great news. Tenant Fire, Lava Fire, Salt Fire, those ones are all basically no hot spots remaining and all edging closer and closer to about 100% containment. So again, overall summary of this video, we have some very challenging fire weather conditions coming in this afternoon. It's still going to be very hot and dry. And then the big question mark throughout this weekend is that thunderstorm threat coming in as well. So I will continue to monitor these. I will continue to do these updates and forecast every day. And then I won't be able to do a full update and forecast later tonight, but I am planning on continuing to do those quick, concise 1 to 2 minute updates that I do on Twitter, as well as posting some of the live footage with the key stats to my Twitter page. You can find that again, Holt Hanley Weather on Twitter. So that basically sums up the story for today. Critical fire weather conditions with that thunderstorm threat coming in. So we will continue to monitor all of these fires extremely closely. Again, big thank you to all of our firefighters out there. Thoughts and prayers go out to everybody who has been affected by these wildfires. And again, I know it seems like it's some very bad news that it's just the start of the season, but again, we will get through this. We got through 2020, and if we got through 2020, we can pretty much get through anything. So hope everybody has a great weekend, and thanks for watching.